Happy Monday, everyone, and welcome to the Good Old Gamer. So quite a lot's happened over the past few days. We have new information about the RTX 3050 actually being a GA107 die. Go figure, who could have seen this one coming? We also found out that NVIDIA really has no clue what they're doing with the RTX 3090 Ti. Intel doing more shady practices out there that we'll talk about in this video. And graphics card prices are starting to come down finally. Now, this is something that I've been talking about for a while. I've noticed it myself, but now we have aggregate data to show that yes, graphics cards are finally on the downtrend and things seem to be getting better. So we're going to talk about all that here today and more. So jumping right into it, we have average AMD Radeon RX 6000 GPU prices reach record low in 13 months. AMD RX 6000 series cards are nearly as cheap as January 2021, so that's a little over a year ago now, and GeForce RTX 30 series reaches July 2021 pricing. So not the best they've ever been because they were MSRP when they first launched. So we're not quite at that point. But okay, so this information is according to 3dcenter.org. The GPU prices are reported from Germany and Austria. So these are European prices. These do not scale across the whole world. Every region is going to be slightly different. So here are the trends over the past few years that they have noticed. So, okay, we can see that the AMD cards never got as high as the NVIDIA cards. That's, of course, due to mining. And as we can see here, coming towards the end, February 13th, so that was just yesterday, actually, we can see that they are much, much lower than they've been in a long time. The Radeon cards are coming in at about 145% of MSRP. It's not great because it's still 45% more, but not as bad. And then the NVIDIA cards coming in at 157%. So like I said, not great because they're still more expensive, just not as expensive as they've been. And if you guys are subscribed over at the Techonomics podcast, I've been talking about this every couple of days with Paul over there. Every time I see new prices come up, I make sure to mention it. So if you haven't subscribed over there, there is a link down below. Make sure you do so because we talk about this stuff every single week, twice a week. And the biggest one that I've seen here recently was the RX 6600s. I've actually seen two examples now of them coming in at $429. That's here in the US. That's $100 more than its MSRP, and it's about 33% more expensive than it should be. So it's still not a great deal. It's not something I'd say you should absolutely buy this, but it indicates that we're not too far away from potentially seeing MSRP, or at least super close to MSRP cards on some AMD cards. Now, the high-end stuff still a ways out. The lowest that I've been seeing on 6700 XTs, for example, is about $800 here in the United States. That's about $300 more than it should be. So that's still got a ways to go. They all do, but at the same time, we're getting there. Now, the NVIDIA cards, to me, don't seem to be going as well as the Germany and Austria numbers seem to be indicating. Personally, as I've noticed, the ones that I see in stock here regularly in the United States have actually gone up over the past month or so by a little bit. So I don't know, that's probably just a region thing, but hopefully the NVIDIA cards will start falling here in the United States as well. As like I said, I've definitely noticed the AMD cards coming down in price. They're always in stock. You can buy any AMD card at any point in time that you want. And like I said, price to performance, they're significantly better than if you could find an NVIDIA card in stock, which they're typically not from what I've seen. So we're getting there, boys. It's good news, and I wanted to make sure to lead this video off with that. Things are getting better, and if you can still hold off for a while longer, please do so. But however, if you're at that point, you have to buy something. The RX 6600 is not too bad. It's on par with the 3060, which you could say is also like 2060 Super, 2070 level. And at $429, I mean, it's just a little bit more than what the 2060 Super was last generation. So if you need to get a card, to me, that right now is probably the way to go, as the 6600 XTs are still more inflated relative to their performance where it was last generation. All right, so the second story is more good news. A lot of good news on this one, or at least at the beginning. Valve releases Steam Deck CAD files for modders. So this is really great. So this shows that Valve really wants to get everybody out there making products for the Steam Deck. And this is a great idea. This will get anybody with a 3D printer. You can make your own grips. You can do basically anything you want to these things now. And it's just going to flood the market with a lot of third-party accessories and cool stuff, and even transformative casing, where you can just pull out maybe the screen and the board and pop it in a whole new case with a whole different design. You have all the files to make this happen now. So we're going to see some really awesome things from this in the not too distant future. But what this really says to me is that Valve isn't screwing around, and they're going to make sure that they're going to make this as customer friendly as possible, at least at first, to try to gain as much market share as possible. And that also says to me that they're not going to just put out a few thousand units and be like, okay, it did okay, but we're not going to make any more. It definitely indicates to me that they're going to go all in on this, as they see that this is a market that needs to be fulfilled. So I'm really glad to see this, and really interested to see some of the cool stuff people come up with. Now on to the NVIDIA news. The NVIDIA news is basically, well, we just duped y'all. Have a nice time. So starting things off, NVIDIA officially has nothing new to say about the GeForce RTX 3090 Ti right now. So this comes from an interview from Jen Anderson, which is an NVIDIA spokesperson speaking to The Verge. So we don't currently have more information to share on the RTX 3090 Ti. Had to do it. But we'll be in touch when we do. So basically, they're just like, yeah, we'll let you know what we're going to be doing here if we do anything at all. Tying in with the NVIDIA news, the RTX 3050 with lower TDP and new GPU. So NVIDIA GeForce RTX 3050 to get GA107 variant with a 115 watt TDP. So basically what NVIDIA did here, and this really confused me because the GA106 dies that they used to launch were on par with the GA107 die. It had the same memory controller, has all the same features, same amount of shader cores. I'm like, why would they do this? Oh, now it makes sense. They always meant to make it GA107, but they needed to dump off their bad GA106 dies first. That's why, because there's only the 3060 on laptop and desktop using the GA106 die. So for the defective units, they needed somewhere to put them. That's why it was a GA106. Now that those are all cleared out of inventory, now time to move on to what the chip was supposed to be. Now, the added benefit is it's pin compatible, so the board partners don't need to change anything. They just drop in the new die. Boom, it just works. It's really not an issue there. So this saves them money, makes things a lot easier for them. And then for the end user, you get the added benefit of a small power consumption decrease due to the more efficient GA107 die. So overall, it's not really a bad thing, except I guess you could say the early adopters on this kind of got screwed. I mean, 130 watts versus 115 is not a big deal, but technically this is the chopped up worst of the worst dies, and then this one right here is actually the full GA107. It's not really too big of a deal, but it's very clear the reason why NVIDIA did this, and it was just to clear out bad GA106 inventory. Now moving on to Intel and their shenanigans. We'll start with the smaller one here that actually makes some sense, and then we'll go on to the other one that makes no sense. But anyways, Intel Core i9 12900KS shows up with a 780 USD price and 150 watt base power, which is irrelevant, but means it'll probably be close to 300 watts when using the PL2 state, which this will use by default anyway, because that's what Alder Lake does. This number right here is irrelevant, as on the K SKUs, this will never be done unless you actively make it so in the BIOS. All right, so for those of you guys that don't know, the 12900KS is the pre-binned version of the top-end Alder Lake CPU. Basically, Intel's just going to take the golden samples and charge you more money for them. That's what they're going to do here. That's it. So these two listings were discovered by Momomo_US, and we have a PBP of 150 watts, as I just said, doesn't really matter in this instance, which is 25 higher than the 12900K, and the CPU will have a single core boost up to 5.5 gigahertz. This is the main reason why this chip exists. That's significantly higher, in this case 300 megahertz upgrade over the 12900K. And then the pricing listed between or around a 780 and 792, and that's about 27% higher than the 12900K. Now, this chip right here is solely designed to compete against the 5800X3D. This is supposed to keep Intel at least competitive with the top gaming CPU in the world. And honestly, at 5.5, and I think all-core is 5.2 gigahertz, this should keep it relatively close. We're talking single-digit percentage points for either side. So this chip right here is only for people that want bragging rights or the best of the best. Now you guys know that I'm a big fan of Alder Lake. I'm very interested in Intel's GPUs that will be coming out, even though we've gotten information that they aren't looking so hot. This really cramps all of the goodwill that Intel has been building for a while now. Intel wants customers to pay for additional features on CPUs after they purchase it. So this is a pretty long article. I'll leave a link in the description below. This is from WCCF Tech, came out a few days ago. So the big thing is Intel has this program called Software Defined Silicon, or SDSI, and this is going to be introduced in Linux 5.18, which will be coming out in a few months. And what this does is it essentially means if you want more features on your CPU, they have a few examples in here that we can use. So, such as support for as much as 4.5 terabytes of memory per individual socket, workstation, virtualization functionality, Intel SpeedStep, that sort of stuff. Basically, if you want more RAM support or lower RAM support or whatever, you will now have to pay for these things. This doesn't look good. Basically, they're just going to lock away features on a chip that you paid for and then charge you more money to unlock it. This is very much akin to microtransactions in games. Game ships with a bunch of content that you can't access unless you pay them more money. It's just really bad because you're going to have this on your hardware now. Obviously, this is something Intel really wants to push through, but I wanted to bring this to your attention so we can push back, and hopefully this never makes it to any sort of customer product out there. Now, obviously, this is a feature only designed for the enterprise level at this point in time, and this is going to be the argument for all of the defenders out there. The devil's advocate position. Well, you know, you can get your base spec, but let's say you need more RAM support. You can just pay $100 and then unlock the CPU, and then instead of, let's say, 1 terabyte, you got 2 or 4 or whatever. Yeah, that sounds cool, except for the fact that the chip should have that feature just unlocked anyway, because it can clearly do it. You can't download upgrades to a CPU. You can only lock off performance unnecessarily. Now, this is obviously not geared towards the segment that we normally look at, and obviously Intel will have a base spec, meaning you pay X amount of money, these are the features you get. If you want more features, you can pay more money. Personally, I'm not overly against that to a certain degree if it lowers the price of the initial product, meaning they basically scalp the people that are going to want more features and make them pay extra money, meanwhile subsidizing everybody else at a lower price. That'd be great, but this is the same thing that we heard about from video games with microtransactions. Well, it'll make games cheaper and all this other stuff and let these other people pay for your games for you, essentially. Well, that never happened. Most games are still $60 and still charge for all the extra cosmetics, and that's likely what would happen in this market as well. So the best thing that we can do as the PC enthusiast and tech community is basically kill this thing before it's born, because this is not good. If this ever gets implemented, we're just going to see AMD do the same thing, and eventually they'll just start locking features. For example, you might buy an 8-core CPU, you want hyper-threading, you got to pay an extra $20 for that or something. It's not out of the realm of possibility if Intel can make this a thing and get people used to it and make people okay with it. It will continue down until they just start locking off all the features. Like I said, for me personally, I just don't like the thought that these companies are becoming so egregious with their little monopolies that they have. Yes, Intel is not a monopoly. They do have a competitor. And unlike the GPU space, they have things like ARM, RISC-V, even though they're investing heavily in RISC-V to make sure that's not a real threat to them. But still, x86 is not the ruler of the CPU world. There are other options available. So Intel is not a monopoly in that space, but in the x86 space, you have Intel and you have AMD. Okay, so it's technically a duopoly, but, you know, these guys kind of just work within each other. If one company does something shitty, the other company will just do something slightly less shitty. So it's not technically collusion, but it functions the same way. So without there being like 10 or 12 different companies fighting for your money in any particular market, these guys are getting away with basically murder, unless me, you, and all the rest of us stand up and say, no, these features are no good. I don't care that it's an enterprise right now. It's going to eventually filter down once it becomes kind of the standard. Once people get acclimated to it at that end, it'll move down to like HEDT, and then eventually it'll hit mainstream, laptop, and all the rest of the segments that we actually care about. So personally, we need to just make sure Intel does not get away with this. Let everybody know it's not okay. Now jumping on over to GOG for the good old game of the day. Dragon Age Origins, the Ultimate Edition, is on sale right now for only $4.99. Now, if you've never played Dragon Age Origins, you may have played Dragon Age 2, you may have played Inquisition. Well, you're doing yourself a major disservice if you do not go back and play the game that started it all. This game was amazing. It was, for me, it felt like an offline MMO RPG with all the elements that you wish you had in an online MMO RPG. The storytelling is great. Voice acting is excellent. The world, everything about this game is fantastic. The music sticks with you. It's definitely timeless, which helps build an atmosphere that very few games really nail. So if you haven't played the game or haven't played it recently, I would definitely recommend picking up Dragon Age Origins. Well, alrighty guys, there you go. Things seem to be getting better on the GPU side. They also seem to be getting worse as NVIDIA just goes, we're going to release a thing, we're not going to release a thing. We might do a thing. Hey, we released a thing, and then we're going to change it and alter it, and now you get a better thing. And yeah, it's a little quirky, but at the very least, as a whole, things seem to be getting better than where they were last year in 2021. 2022 has been continuing to make things better and better on this front. And I believe by the end of the year, everything should be okay until we get the new graphics cards and they're just going to have stupid MSRPs to begin with. And then we'll be like, eesh. But anyways, that's a topic of conversation for another time. Paul and I will talk about all of this stuff on the Techonomics podcast. We do that live twice a week. If you want to go ahead and join the conversation, click the link in the description below, hit subscribe, hit the little notification bell, and you can chat with us about all this cool stuff there live. And until then, I will see you guys on Friday with more tech news. And that's really all I have for you guys here today. I will catch you guys in the next video.